Hey there, welcome to another episode of Digging In. We are taking just a short break from the Psalms. We've been doing the Psalms here at Sunnyslope since the beginning of this year, and we're taking about a 2 week break because here at Sunnyslope we do 1 week where we focus on the Gems Girls Club, and then a second week where we focus on the Cadets Boys Club. And for both of those services, we take some time and look at the passage that each of those respective clubs have been looking at throughout the year. And so today, we're going to be looking at a passage in First Timothy chapter 4, verses 1 through 16, or verses 6 through 16. I did not, I already had this all kind of laid out from a time that I preached on this another time. So, uh, our video today is not going to have the part where we break the text down into its smaller pieces. What I'll do, I'll put the screen up, I'll put the text up on the screen so that you can see it. And here's the passage that we'll be looking at. Now, we've been spending a lot of time looking at poetry since the beginning of the year. Poetry obviously follows some different rules than a letter does. And that's maybe just a good reminder that anytime you come to different genres in the Bible, anytime you come to different types of biblical literature, whether it be poetry, whether it be wisdom, prophecy, epistles, whatever it might be, you have to be mindful of some of the different writing conventions. Just as in English, like if you were to, well, I used to use the example of a phone book, but we don't use as much anymore. But if you were to, let's say, open a menu at a restaurant, you would read that very differently than if you were reading a book of like poetry, or if you're going to read a play, that would read differently. That would follow some different rules than if you're reading, a textbook or a manual. And the same thing is true in the Bible. So that's just maybe a good reminder. So as we have this up in front of us, I'm going to start just by pointing out a couple of little things that are worth noting. A lot of times, especially in letters, we see these if then constructions. So when you see the word if, a lot of times you'll see then it's a conditional sentence. And so the second sentence is either then false or it's true, but it's contingent upon the first one. So if you do this, then this. And that's what Paul says. If you point these things out, you will be a good minister. In other words, this whole section here kind of functions as an introduction to the main section. Paul's really saying if you want to be, he's talking to Timothy, remember, he's speaking to a younger pastor, and he's saying if you want to be good at what you do, if you want to be a faithful minister, here's what you need to do. You need to point these things out. If you do that, that will lead to success in terms of what you've been entrusted with doing. Um, there's there's a couple of well, I'll tell you what, I'll leave that for just a moment. So that's kind of the first thing. I think that's a basic introduction idea here. This first little paragraph functions as an introduction to this section, in which Paul is going to give guidance to a less experienced pastor who's kind of a rookie pastor, and Paul's going to say, this is what you need to do in order to faithfully carry out the work that has been entrusted to you. So let's go a little further in the text. I'm going to scroll up just a little bit. And one of the things that you're going to notice is that there are a series of both positive and negative commands. So we call those imperatives, and they're prohibitions and they're imperatives. Do these things, but don't do these things. So and each I'll see if I can kind of highlight this as we go through. Let's highlight in red some of the prohibitions that we see here. First of all, have nothing to do with. There's one. Um, let's see here. Down in verse 12, don't let anyone look down on you. That's another negative prohibition. There's another one a little further down, do not neglect your gift, but it's not up on the screen, so we can't see it. Now let's change pace just a little bit. Let's highlight some of the positive things that Paul is instructing. Train yourself to be godly. Um, Command. teach these things, set an example in speech, conduct, faith, and love. There's a few more that we'll get to a little bit later. So you see what you kind of see already as we just begin to go through here. You see a pattern. What Paul is setting certain behaviors out of bounds, and he's instructing other behaviors as necessary. Now, as I like to often do, I like to highlight certain words, and I'm going to do that now because this will maybe begin to show you what is Paul's bigger picture. He's commanding certain things and he's prohibiting other things. Um, to what end or to what purpose? Well, let's look here. I'll erase that just for a moment. Um, One of the words that comes up, oh, at least a handful of times throughout this text is the idea of godly and godliness. And that's I see it at least twice here, but then I also see the negative side of it. So maybe we'll kind of just do this. So it's the same color, but rather than highlight it. So there's a contrast between godlessness and godliness. So what Paul is kind of what that maybe hints at is this idea towards how to practice godliness and avoid godlessness. That's what Paul is urging Timothy to train towards. Um, so let's and the reason for that, Paul kind of gets at that here. If you look over here, he's talking about value um, for the present life and the life to come, holding promise for both the present and the life that is to come. So, what I notice about this here, this is just kind of something that occurred to me. This section seems to be focusing on personal training. We'll put that here like this. So Paul is saying he's speaking to Timothy, saying, avoid these godless myths. Now we don't quite know what these exactly are. What are godless myths? What are old wives' tales? We have an idea of what that might mean in today's context, but did it mean something different in Paul's day? We're not quite sure yet, and we'll have to dig a little more into that that's part of kind of the next step of the study. But for now, we just notice Paul is saying, avoid these things which lack godliness or which lack godliness, but instead focus on the training of godliness. Train yourself to be godly. Maybe there's another word that we can just quick highlight. Just we kind of have seen it already. Maybe it's but the idea of training yourself. There's that maybe brings the picture into clearer focus. It's training towards and working towards godliness, because as a minister and as a teacher in the church, it's necessary and it's important that Timothy himself be exercising himself toward godly behavior. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't have application beyond just what a minister or a pastor should do. Clearly, it would make sense that we want to have godly behavior for everybody. But since Paul is addressing Timothy, that's the most specific application. Now, this whole section, as I said, I think it focuses primarily on the practice of personal training toward godliness. So we'll just make a note of that. And just kind of observe that. Now then the question is, well, what about this next section down here? And here's where all of our hard work has to disappear. I wish there's some way we could keep it, but I don't think there is, at least not that I'm aware of. So we're going to clear all of this, and then we're going to scroll. We're going to kind of bring up the next section, which really will take us to the end of the text. Whoops. Here we go. That gets us pretty well close. Now let's just review real quick, just for the so there's prohibitions. Don't let anyone look down on you. Do not neglect your gift. I said that earlier. I kind of hinted. And then there's some positive things that Paul also tells. Command, teach, set an example, devote yourself to the reading, be diligent, give yourself, watch your life, persevere. So there's all these positive things that Paul also tells. Now, the question is, what do all of these things kind of hold in common. And one of the things that you notice is that, okay, it's about Timothy, it's about how Timothy will conduct himself and some of the things Timothy will do. But you'll notice that the focus is external. Set an example for the believers. So if the earlier section, if verses 6 through 10 talk about personal training, the second part seems to focus more on conduct in the life of the community. And he talks about, the importance of reading scripture, preaching, and teaching. By the way, that's another word that I noticed occurs fairly regularly. So I thought maybe we'd highlight that as well. But command and teach. Here's that word teach. All right. We had a little technical hiccup there. I think I lost all my highlighting and stuff. Little internet issue, but I think I got it back mostly to what it was. So here we are. You see the emphasis here on teaching. Paul makes this point, commanding and teaching. Devote yourself to the teaching. Watch your life and doctrine closely. Doctrine, the word there is the same in Greek. It's essentially the same word for teaching. It's a slightly different variant, but it comes from the same root, so we're going to include that. But you see in all of this, the focus in this part here is this is all external. If the earlier part of the text was focused on individual godliness, the second part is external. It's focusing on how Timothy will conduct himself for the benefit of others. And so he's to set an example in all of these different ways of life. There's also, so this is his example for others, and then this is over here, you might say this is like church conduct, or it's instruction for others. I'm not exactly sure what word we'd use there. And then down here, I was wondering a little bit if this is really a good way to talk about accountability. So Paul, he says, being diligent, giving yourself so everyone may see your progress. Now that's an interesting idea. Does Paul want Timothy just to, to show off? And that seems really unlikely, but it does seem that what Paul wants from Timothy is that he will be recognizing that he's on display so that people can sort of watch and maybe hold him accountable for his growth. Persevering, watching your life and doctrine closely, that too could fit with accountability. So I thought maybe that might be a good heading, or maybe that's kind of a good way to summarize. Maybe we'll modify that as we go on, but that does seem to be a pretty good, that seems to capture what Paul is after. So when we look at all of this together, the idea begins to emerge that Paul is teaching Timothy, he's showing Timothy how to be an effective pastor by first training himself and then remembering that he is to be an example for others in the way that he himself lives, but also in how he is teaching and instructing others and holding himself accountable. So those are kind of three themes that all begin to come out, or maybe it's two main themes. It's personal godliness and it's setting an example. And then under that, there's teaching and there's accountability, or there's the example, there's the teaching, and there's the accountability. So you kind of get to see a general flow of the text. And that just with that 15 or so minute study, we've actually done pretty well at identifying what the text is about. Now, our next task is a couple of things that we need to do. We need to explore a little more some of these ideas. This is where we do a little digging into dictionaries and commentaries and other such things. We begin to ask ourselves, what is the relationship of these ideas to the person and work of Jesus? And then we do some kind of reflection on what does this mean for us today? So far, we've been focusing entirely on what did it mean for Paul and Timothy and the early church. Then we also have to ask, so how does that affect us today? What's the message for God's church today? Those are a little harder steps to do on a video, so that's why we're not going to do them on a video, but come back May 4 here at Sunnyslope Church. You can hear this message. Thanks for watching, digging in. We'll see you next time.